Have you ever noticed that the people who are always available are often the ones who feel the most invisible? Perhaps you have spent years believing that your kindness would eventually be recognized, that your loyalty, your patience, your willingness to always be there would one day be returned with the same intensity, but instead, something unexpected happened. The more you gave, the less you seemed to matter. Your presence became expected. Your sacrifices became ordinary. Your silence became invisible. And without realizing it, you slowly began to disappear inside your own life. So, Carl Jung believed that one of the greatest tragedies of the human psyche is not rejection. It is self-abandonment, because long before another person has the power to neglect you, you have often learned to neglect yourself. This lesson rarely begins in adulthood. It begins much earlier. A child quickly discovers that certain parts of their personalities receive love, while other parts receive discomfort. Perhaps every time you expressed anger, someone told you to stop. Every time you cried, someone called you weak. Every time you spoke too loudly, someone asked you to be quiet. Little by little, your mind began collecting evidence. Evidence that being yourself could cost you love. And for a child, there is no greater fear. So the mind does something extraordinary. It adapts. Not because it is dishonest, but because survival always comes before authenticity. Carl Jung called this adaptation the persona. The persona is not your true self. It is the version of you that learned how to survive inside the expectations of others. It smiles when it wants to cry. It agrees when it wants to disagree. It apologizes for things that were never its fault. It becomes agreeable, reliable, predictable, safe. And the strange part is that everyone applauds it. Teachers admire it. Friends appreciate it. Coworkers depend on it. Family members praise it, until one day you look around and realize that every relationship in your life was built around a version of you that no longer feels real. Imagine spending decades building a magnificent house, every brick perfectly placed, every room carefully decorated, every window polished, only to discover that you built it for someone else to live in. That is the life of the persona. From the outside, everything appears complete, but inside, the owner never truly arrived. This is why some people experience a strange emptiness even after achieving everything they once believed they wanted. They found success, respect, recognition, yet every accomplishment will feel strangely hollow. Not because success is meaningless, but because the one receiving it is not the real self. It is the mask. And a mask can never feel fulfilled. It can only feel maintained. Every morning, it asks the same question. What do I need to become today so that no one rejects me? Notice the difference. It never asks what is true. It asks what is acceptable. That single difference changes an entire life, because once acceptance becomes your highest priority, truth quietly leaves the room. You stop choosing relationships that nourish your soul. You choose relationships that validate your identity. You stop choosing work that gives you meaning. You choose work that earns admiration. You stop asking, what kind of life would make me feel alive? And begin asking, what kind of life and will make other people approve of me? Without realizing it, your future is no longer being shaped by your deepest values. It is being shaped by your deepest fears. Jung warned that whatever remains unconscious does not disappear. It simply begins to govern your life from the shadows. Imagine a king who abandons his throne. The kingdom does not remain empty. Something else takes control. The same happens inside the human mind. Whenever your authentic self abandons its rightful place, fear quietly becomes king. Fear decides who you love. Fear decides what you say. Fear decides when you remain silent. Fear decides how much of yourself you are willing to sacrifice just to belong. And the frightening part is that fear rarely feels like fear. It feels like responsibility. It feels like maturity. It feels like kindness. It feels like being a good person. That is why so many people spend decades calling their prison their personality. They say, "This is just who I am. I've always been like this. I don't like disappointing people. I can't say no." But Carl Jung would ask a different question. Who taught you that saying no made you unworthy of love? Because no one is born believing their value depends on constant availability. That belief is learned, and everything that is learned can be questioned. Perhaps for the first time, you are beginning to realize that the greatest danger was never becoming disliked. The greatest danger was becoming so committed to being accepted that you forgot who was waiting behind the mask. And that forgotten part of you has been patient long before today's exhaustion, long before the relationships that left you empty, long before you convinced yourself that giving more would finally make you enough. It has been waiting for the moment you would finally stop asking, "How can I become who they need?" and begin asking, "Who was I before I became afraid kind of losing their love?" That question is where every true transformation begins. There is something almost no one realizes about the persona. It does not disappear. It's simply because you recognize it. Awareness is only the beginning. The real challenge comes much later. It begins the first time your authentic self asks you to disappoint someone. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but because your soul can no longer survive inside a life built entirely for other people. This is the moment most transformations quietly die, not because people lack courage, but because they mistake the discomfort of growth for the danger of making the wrong decision. Imagine a bird that has lived its entire life like inside a golden cage, like the cage is beautiful, like it is safe. Food arrives every day. No storms, no predators, no uncertainty. Then one morning, someone opens the door. Freedom is finally possible. Yet the bird does not fly. Why? Because the cage has become familiar, and familiarity can feel stronger than freedom. The human mind works the same way. Most people do not remain inside emotional prisons because the door is locked. They remain because they have forgotten that the door was never locked to begin with. Carl Jung spent years exploring this mystery. He noticed that every human being carries two opposing desires: the desire to belong and the desire to become. At first, they seem identical, but eventually, they begin to pull in opposite directions. Belonging asks you to adapt. Becoming asks you to transform. Belonging whispers, stay the same so they won't leave. Becoming whispers, change even if they do. Every meaningful life is shaped by the tension between these two voices. The tragedy is that most people never hear the second one because the first voice is much louder. It speaks through approval, through applause, through expectations, through guilt, through fear. The second voice is almost silent. It never argues. It never forces. It simply waits patiently for the day you become exhausted enough to stop running. Have you ever wondered why some seasons of your life feel strangely empty? Why conversations that once excited you now feel meaningless? Why places that once felt familiar suddenly feel foreign? Perhaps nothing around you has changed. Perhaps the one changing is you. Growth rarely announces itself. It begins with discomfort, with restlessness, with the strange feeling that the life you carefully built no longer fits the person you are becoming. Many people panic at this stage. They believe something is wrong, so they distract themselves. They become busier, louder, more available, anything to avoid listening to the quiet voice calling them toward a different life. But the voice never disappears. Ignore it today, and it returns tomorrow. Silence it tomorrow, and it returns next year. Bury it for an entire decade, and one morning it will greet you through a feeling you cannot explain, like an emptiness that success cannot fill, a loneliness that relationships cannot cure, an exhaustion that sleep cannot heal, because none of those things were ever missing. What was missing was you. Jung believed that the psyche is always moving toward wholeness, always, even when your conscious mind is moving in the opposite direction. This is why life has a strange habit of removing what no longer serves your evolution, sometimes through failure, sometimes through heartbreak, sometimes through endings you never wanted. At first, they feel like punishment. Only years later, do you realize they were invitations to become someone your old identity could never imagine. Think about a sculptor standing before a block of marble. The masterpiece is already there and hidden. The sculptor does not create it. He removes everything the sankas that does not belong. Jung believed your true self is revealed the very same way, not by adding another achievement, another title, another relationship, another layer of approval, but by removing every belief that convinced you had to become someone else to deserve love, every false expectation, every inherited fear, every identity that no longer belongs to the person waiting beneath it. Perhaps that is why real transformation often feels less like learning and more like remembering who you were before fear became your teacher, before rejection became your compass, before pleasing everyone became more important than listening to your own soul. And once that remembering begins, There is no returning to the life you once believed was enough. Because the person who has seen their own truth can never again find peace inside a beautiful prison. There is an ancient story about a traveler who spent his entire life searching for a hidden treasure. He crossed mountains, sailed across oceans, walked through deserts, asked kings, listened to scholars, collected maps from people who claimed to know the way. After decades, he returned home, old, tired, disappointed. One evening, while repairing the floor of the small house where he had been born, his shovel struck something solid beneath the foundation of the home he had spent his entire life trying to escape. Lay the treasure he had been searching for. Whether the story is true does not matter, because psychologically it happens every single day. People search for confidence inside achievements, for peace inside relationships, for worth inside recognition, for identity inside other people's opinions, like never realizing what they seek cannot be given. It can only be remembered. Carl Jung believed that every human being carries within them an image of completeness, not perfection, completeness. He called it the self, not the ego, not the personality, not the image you carefully present to the world, something far older, far quieter, far wiser. Imagine standing beside a perfectly still lake. The surface reflects everything: the sky, the mountains, the trees. But the moment the water becomes disturbed, the reflection disappears. The sky has not changed. The mountains have not moved. Only the surface has become restless. The human mind is much the same. When fear, controls your attention, you lose sight, of your true nature, not because it disappeared, because your inner waters have forgotten how to become still. This is why Jung never believed that healing was about becoming someone different. Healing was remembering what fear made you forget. Perhaps this explains why certain people continue chasing one achievement after another. One promotion, another relationship, another degree, another house, another goal, convinced that fulfillment is waiting just beyond the next success. But fulfillment is not a destination. It is a relationship with the deepest part of yourself. Without that relationship, nothing is enough. With it, very little is required. There comes a point when the soul grows tired of negotiating, tired of asking permission to exist, tired, of becoming smaller so that everyone else, can remain comfortable. That tiredness is not weakness. It is wisdom, because eventually the soul realizes that every compromise made against itself creates another fracture inside the psyche. And fractures always demand more energy to keep hidden. Have you ever noticed how exhausting it is to pretend that something doesn't hurt when it does? How exhausting it is to smile when your heart is breaking, to say, "I'm fine," when every part of you is silently asking for rest. The body can maintain that performance for a while, the mind for a little longer, but the soul always tells the truth. Sometimes through anxiety, sometimes through depression, sometimes, through an overwhelming feeling, that your life, no longer belongs, to you, many people, try to silence, those feelings, Jung did the opposite, like he listened, because symptoms are rarely the enemy, they are messages, messages written, in the language of the unconscious. The question is whether, you are willing to read them. Imagine that every painful emotion you have ever experienced is standing outside your door, not to destroy you, not to punish you, but to deliver a letter. Most people, I'd never open it, and they send the messenger away, and they distract themselves, they become busier, they blame someone else, they numb themselves, anything, I except reading what the letter says, but the messenger always returns. Not because life is cruel, because the message is too important to remain unread. Perhaps your loneliness has never been asking for another relationship. Perhaps it has been asking for your attention. Perhaps your exhaustion has never been asking for another vacation. Perhaps it has been asking for another identity. And perhaps the anxiety you have fought for so many years has not been trying to destroy your peace. Perhaps it has been trying to destroy the false life that has kept you away from yourself. This possibility changes everything, because if your suffering is carrying a message, then your task is no longer to escape it. Your task is to understand it. And the moment understanding begins, transformation is no longer a distant hope. It becomes an inevitable consequence of finally seeing what has always been there, waiting beneath the noise. There is one truth that the ego will fight until its very last breath. You cannot become yourself while trying to remain everything to everyone. At some point, a choice must be made, not between success and failure, not between love and loneliness, but between the life that feels familiar and the life that feels true. The ego will always choose familiarity, because familiarity requires no courage. The self asks for something else. It asks that you step into a future where no guarantee exists, where approval is uncertain, where rejection is possible, where misunderstanding is inevitable. Yet strangely, that uncertain path is the only one that leads to freedom. Many people believe freedom means having more choices. Jung believed freedom begins when your choices are no longer controlled by fear. Think about that for a moment. How many decisions have you made simply because you feared what someone else might think? How many dreams were abandoned before they even began because rejection felt unbearable? How many times did you betray your own intuition and to preserve an image that no longer belongs to you? Every one of those moments left a mark, not on your reputation, on your soul, because every time you silence your deepest truth, the distance between the ego and the self grows wider. Eventually, that distance becomes suffering, not because life became harder, because you became divided. A divided mind cannot know peace. One part moves toward truth, another pulls back toward safety. One part longs to create, another asks whether people will approve. One part wants to love freely, another is terrified of being hurt again. This inner conflict drains more energy than any difficult job or demanding relationship. It is exhausting to spend every day arguing it with yourself. Carl Jung once observed that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Notice, he did not say the achievement or the reward. He called it a privilege because very few people ever allow themselves to experience it, not because they cannot, because the one thing the ego fears most, the death of illusion. Illusions are comforting. They tell you that one more promotion will finally make you enough. One more relationship will finally heal your loneliness. One more accomplishment will finally silence your self-doubt. But the illusion always moves one step farther away, like the horizon, beautiful, visible, forever unreachable. The self offers something very different. It does not promise a painless life. It does not promise that everyone will understand you. It does not promise constant happiness. It offers something far more valuable, integrity and the quiet peace that comes when your inner world and your outer life finally speak the same language. Imagine living one day without pretending, not proving, not performing, not seeking permission to exist, just breathing as the person you already are. For many people, that idea feels impossible. Not because it is impossible, because they have spent so many years wearing the mask that they confuse it on with their own face, and yet every mask has one weakness, right? It cannot survive the light of awareness. The moment, you begin noticing how often you betray yourself, the mask begins to crack. Not all at once, slowly, conversation by conversation, decision by decision, boundary by boundary, until one ordinary morning you realize something extraordinary. You no longer feel the need to chase, to convince, to prove, to explain, not because you have become indifferent, because you have remembered that your worth was never waiting inside someone else's approval. It was waiting inside you, quietly, patiently, faithfully, from the very beginning. The moment you stop chasing approval, something unexpected happens. Your attention returns home. For years, it had been scattered, a little in every relationship, a little inside every argument, a little inside every expectation you could never satisfy. Your mind was no longer your own. It belonged to every opinion that entered your life. Every criticism echoed for days. Every rejection became another reason to question yourself. Every disappointment felt like evidence, that you were still not enough. But none of those voices were ever your own. Carl Jung believed that one of the greatest dangers is not hearing the opinions of others. It is allowing those opinions to become the voice inside your own mind, because eventually you no longer need someone else to judge you. You become your own prison, your own critic, your own jailer. And perhaps that is the cruelest consequence of living through the persona. Even when the people who demanded your perfection are no longer there, their voices remain, still whispering, still correcting, still asking you to become someone easier to accept. So that is why healing is never only about forgiving other people. Sometimes, it is about recognizing that you have continued their work long after they stopped. Think about that. How many times have you rejected yourself before anyone else had the chance? How many opportunities did you abandon because you assumed you would fail? How many conversations never happened because you imagined being misunderstood? How many dreams were buried without ever being tested? Fear does not always stop your actions. Sometimes it prevents them from ever existing. And the frightening part is that after enough years, it begins to feel normal. You forget what courage used to feel like. You forget what curiosity used to sound like. You forget the child who once explored the world without asking whether anyone approved. That child is not gone. The self never disappears. It simply waits. It waits. Behind every fear, you refuse to face. Behind every truth, you refuse to speak. Behind every decision, you postpone because the timing never feels right. The self is remarkably patient. It never forces. It never demands. It simply continues calling you through the quiet moments you cannot explain. A sunrise that suddenly moves you. A sentence that feels as though it was written only for you. A dream you cannot forget. A silence that somehow feels more alive than the noise you have been living in. These moments are invitations, small openings through which your deeper nature tries to reach your conscious life. Most people dismiss them. They return to the routine, back to the performance, back to the endless cycle of proving, earning, explaining, pleasing, until one day life interrupts the performance, not out of cruelty, out of necessity. A relationship ends, a career changes, health forces everything to stop. Someone leaves without warning. The identity that once felt permanent begins to collapse. At first, it'd feel like the end, but Jung would gently remind us that endings often reveal what beginnings could never show, because when everything false falls away, something extraordinary becomes possible. For the first time, you are no longer asking, who do they need me to be? You begin asking, who remains when there is no one left to impress? That question cannot be answered by society, not by your family, not by your achievements, not even by your own memories. It can only be answered in silence, in honesty, in the long, sometimes uncomfortable conversation between your ego and your soul. And perhaps that conversation is the most important one you will ever have, because the answer will not simply change the way you see yourself. It will change every relationship, every decision, every boundary, every dream you choose to pursue from this moment forward. The greatest transformation never begins the day the world starts seeing you differently. It begins the day you finally stop looking at yourself through someone else's eyes. From that moment, life begins to feel different, not because the world has changed, but because you are no longer meeting the world through fear. For years, fear decided who deserved your attention, who deserved your time, who deserved your silence, who deserved your forgiveness. And perhaps without realizing it, the one person who deserved those things the most was always the one you neglected, yourself. This is why true healing often feels so unfamiliar. It is not because you are becoming someone else. It is because you are finally treating yourself with the same compassion you have offered to everyone around you. Imagine what your life would look like if every ounce of understanding you gave away also belonged to you. Imagine if every encouraging word you spoke to someone else became the way you spoke to yourself. Imagine if every boundary you respected belonged first to your own soul. How different would your life become? Perhaps the answer is closer than you think, because transformation is rarely one extraordinary decision. It is thousands of ordinary moments here where you quietly choose, not to abandon yourself. Again, one conversation where you speak honestly, one invitation you politely decline, one expectation you decide is no longer yours to carry, one morning where you stop apologizing for existing. Those moments appear insignificant, but the unconscious does not measure life through dramatic events. It measures repetition. Every time you choose yourself without guilt, your mind learns something new. Every time you honor your own limits without apology, the old identity loses a little of its power. Every time you refuse to betray your deepest truth, the self becomes stronger. Transformation is not built through one heroic act. It is built through quiet consistency, through choices that almost nobody sees. And this is why so many people misunderstand what strength really is. Strength is not becoming emotionless. Strength is not proving that you no longer care. Strength is remaining deeply open without becoming available to everything that drains your soul. There is wisdom in an open heart, but there is equal wisdom in a guarded gate. Not every person who knocks should enter. Not every opinion should become your belief. Not every criticism deserves your attention. Not every expectation deserves your obedience. The mature soul understands that protecting its inner world is not selfish. It is sacred. Imagine trying to build a beautiful garden. Every day you plant new seeds, you water them, you care for them, but every night you leave the gate open. Animals enter, people walk across, the flowers, the soil is disturbed. The roots never have time to grow. Would you blame the garden for never blooming? Or would you realize that growth requires protection? Your inner life is no different. Every dream is a seed. Every conviction is a root. Every new version of yourself needs time before it is exposed to the world. This is why Carl Jung believed that individuation is an intimate process. It is not performed for an audience like that. It unfolds in silence, or away from applause, or away from comparison, away from the endless pressure to explain, who you are becoming, some transformations lose their power the moment they are announced, not because they are weak, because they are still taking root. A tree does not become stronger because everyone is watching it grow. It becomes stronger because its roots continue growing where no one can see them. Perhaps your own life is asking for that same kind of patience, not to become invisible, but to become deeply rooted, because people can only shake the branches. They cannot move the roots that have learned where they truly belong. And when your roots finally reach the deepest part of your own soul, something extraordinary happens. You stop searching and for your value in places yours where it never existed. You stop begging for recognition from people who were never capable of seeing you. You stop measuring your worth, through the changing opinions, of a changing world, because at last you have discovered, the only place, where your identity, was always meant and to rest, and within yourself. There is one final illusion that quietly controls millions of lives. The illusion that becoming yourself is a destination. It isn't. It is a relationship. A relationship you either strengthen or neglect every single day. There will never come a morning when you wake up and suddenly feel complete forever. Life does not move that way. The soul is alive. It continues to unfold, to reveal, to challenge, to invite. Every season asks something different of you, the person you needed to become 5 years ago cannot carry you through the next 5. Growth demands that you keep releasing old identities before they become new prisons. This is why Jung believed that individuation is not a single event. It is the quiet work of an entire lifetime. Again and again and again. Each time you think you have finally arrived, life gently asks another question. What else are you pretending to be? What truth are you still avoiding? What fear is still making your decisions? These questions are not punishments. They are invitations, because every honest answer returns another piece of your soul. Perhaps that is why the people who have done the deepest inner work often appear so peaceful. Not because their lives are free from difficulty, but because they are no longer fighting themselves. They have stopped trying to become someone worthy of love. They have remembered that their worth was never something to achieve, only something to uncover. Imagine standing before an ancient mirror. For years, dust has gathered across its surface. You assume the mirror is broken, and you assume it has lost its ability to reflect. But then, one quiet afternoon, you wipe away a single layer of dust. The reflection appears, not because the mirror became something new, because it finally revealed what had always been there. That is the work of the soul. Not creating a new identity, removing everything that has been hiding the one that already exists. Carl Jung understood that the deepest truth are often the simplest. You do not need to earn your right to exist. You do not need to perform, to deserve love. You do not need to abandon yourself, like to keep other people like comfortable. And the life that is meant for you will never require, the destruction of your own soul. Like, yes, some people will misunderstand your boundaries. Others will mistake your silence for distance. Some will prefer the old version of you, the version that never questioned, never refused, never changed. Let them. They are grieving a role, not a person, because the people who truly see you will never ask you to become smaller and for their comfort, and they will recognize on the quiet strength of someone like who has finally stopped running from themselves. And perhaps that is the real meaning of transformation. Not becoming someone impressive. Becoming someone who no longer needs to impress. Not becoming someone everyone admires. Becoming someone who can finally look into the mirror without looking away. If these words have stayed with you until this moment, perhaps something inside you already knows what must come next. Not tomorrow, not when life becomes easier, not when everyone understands. Today, choose one moment, one conversation, one decision, where you refuse to abandon yourself. Again, it may seem like a small step, but every great transformation begins with one quiet act of honesty, one quiet act of courage, one quiet act of self-respect. And years from now, when you look back, you may realize that your life did not change on the day the world finally accepted you. It changed on the day you finally accepted yourself. That is where every journey toward wholeness truly begins, and perhaps it is also where yours begins today.